Today we're talking about bind-offs that incorporate either decreases or increases, and they're pretty cool to know. The first one I'm going to show you will be the decrease Ssk bind off. This makes a very firm and even edge. If it turns out too tight, you can always use a bigger needle if you have trouble with your bind off being too tight, but it makes a very pretty edge. And that's the decrease Ssk. The second one I'm going to show you is the decrease knit two together, and it makes a very expandable bind off, as you can see. Actually kind of makes a little bit of a space in between the stitches, and this is great for anything that needs, a little more stretch on the end. Lastly, and Mom didn't leave me a pretty little swatch of it, is the increase bind off. This is a cool one to know. Now normally you wouldn't do it on worsted weight yarn like I do. This, to me, this increase is best when you have something that really needs to stretch out. Maybe you've taken a yarn and knitted on needles much larger than what you normally would, and it's something that you need a lot of expansion with. And you can actually control how much it expands. At the first, I start off with just one stitch in between. It actually is making like a little chain, as you can see, in between each stitch. At the end, I've made it even more stretchy by adding two. And look how much this will stretch out. So you can see why it's perfect for something that's going to really expand when blocked. So here's how to do decrease and increase bind offs. To do the decrease Ssk bind off, you start by knitting one stitch. You slip the next stitch knitwise. Then you take the left needle and insert it into the front of these two stitches and knit them together. So slip one knitwise into the front, knit them together. It's just like doing an Ssk. Slip one, knit them together. Get to the end, just fasten off as normal. You see, this makes a very firm, even edge. I did this with the same size needle as my swatch. If I wanted it to be a little less firm, I could have gone up one needle size. To do the decrease knit two together bind off, you start by knitting two stitches together. Take the stitch, put it back over on this needle, knit two together, return the stitch, knit two together. When you get to the end, fasten off as normal. As you see, you have a very expanded edge. It actually makes a hole, a little space in between each stitch. Look how expandable that is. To do the increase bind off, you start like you normally would. You knit two stitches, pull one over. Before I go to knit the next stitch, I'm going to stick my needle into the front here, wrap the yarn, and pull through again. Now I knit a stitch, pull over, and put the needle into the front of this stitch and pull a loop through it, just knitting into it. Knit a stitch, bind off, into the front, wrap and pull through. As you can see, it's actually adding almost a chain in between each stitch, making this edge super flexible. This is good if you're doing something maybe with a yarn knit on a much larger needle that's really going to spread out. In fact, you can make it spread out even more if needed. So we're going to bind off one. All you do is you're going to knit into the stitch once, And then you can do it again twice. And that will add even more space in between the stitches. 1, 2. You could do it 3 times if you wanted to, or if you're finding it's a little too flexible, you can even alternate how many you do in between each one. I'll do one more so you can see how flexible this is getting. See, it's getting even more flexible as I do that. Look how much it's spreading out. This is a cool bind off to know. Probably the biggest problem I have is forgetting to do it, or how many times I've done it. You have to kind of pay attention. It's real easy just to be binding off as normal. And when you get to the end, you will end with just the pullover bind off. There's no sense in putting extra stitches at the end of your project. And you can see here it is with one in between. And look how much it really spreads out. Of course, you don't really get the full effect with this. This is really something you'd use more with bigger yarns knit really loosely. You can see how much it makes that edge flare.